things get stressful, like my stress posture is to withdraw and try to do it all on myself. Like I don't need anybody else. There's a big fancy phrase for that. It's called self-will run riot. That's when my self-will gets crazy, gets nuts, because I don't need anybody else. This is all on me. And inevitably, we all learn that it's unsustainable, right? So I need to be reminded that when it feels like I'm surrounded, I'm not. And so that's cool. So we've been walking alongside John through his gospel in this series and his eyewitnesses experiences with Jesus. And as a friend, as a disciple of Jesus, he wrote this documentation we still have. We call it the Gospel of John. And he organized his account around all these miracles of Jesus, things that he calls signs, not just miracles. They were signs because he said they point to something. Specifically, they point to who Jesus claimed to be, his identity. And these weren't just opportunities for Jesus to show off, just weren't just like random acts of kindness as he found himself. There was a purpose to him. And Jesus was, in fact, as John tells us, who he claimed to be, the Messiah, the Son of God. And that's what these signs all pointed to. So, as I was kind of thinking, let my mind wander a little bit this week, I wonder if you've ever thought this. Have you just kind of wondered, okay, if God would show up the same way he did in these signs to me, it'd be a whole lot easier to believe, right? Like if God would just do something amazing, if God would just do, like if I could see him walk on the water, if I could see him heal somebody, right? Just one time, like John did, then maybe I could have bigger faith, right? Then maybe I could give more. Then maybe I could do more. I'd step out a little bit easier, follow Jesus better. Like if I were able to see those miracles firsthand, that would be pretty cool. Not just hear about them, read about them. Or is that just me too? Right? You ever thought about that? I think it's natural, right? But I can't help but think also too, as when you stop and think about everything that goes on around us, what we actually are surrounded by. We're surrounded by these miracles every day. And I think God can become so apparent. I mean, he can become so unimpressive, even routine, because, I get up every morning. I breathe. My blood keeps pumping. All this kind of stuff that God has miraculously done on our behalf, and if we're not careful, we miss God in all of it. And so if we're going to believe, just like some of those who follow Jesus around all the time back in these days, we want God to do something spectacular. I get it. So we would love God to show up and like, okay, prove yourself to me, because it's really hard right now sometimes, right? And I wonder, okay, if God doesn't think, okay, like what? Like what could I do for you to better impress you? What if I created a huge rock and it was big enough for you to live on, and I fine-tuned everything about it and everything around it so it would sustain life and it would keep things going, right? And it would stand in stark contrast to every other rock, floating rocks in the universe everywhere else. Like what if I did something like that? Oh yeah, I already did that, right? You're walking around, you're living on it, right? And we're like, no, God. Do something amazing, right? Yeah, okay, Earth, that's great. Okay, well, how about this? What if I created a 600 megapixel camera? If you don't know, if your new iPhone has a 12 megapixel camera, I think, right? And you're pretty impressed with that. Wow, look at all this stuff I can do. What if I created not just one? What if I created two 600 megapixel cameras? And I fastened them right to the front of your head, right? And they were autofocused. They did everything you needed to do from them. And then, not only that, what if I connected those megapixel cameras to a 300 gigahertz computer that was fast enough to do anything you wanted to do, enough memory for you to pass knowledge from generation to generation to generation, right? What if I did something like that? That'd blow your mind, right? Yeah, I already did that too, right? You're using it right now. How about this little miracle? This is fascinating and gross. What if, this is God telling you, what if by the time Dennis finishes this next sentence, 50,000 cells in your body are going to die and be replaced by new ones? Now wait, just did it again, right? Just happened again. That's cool and gross a little bit, right? And it does all of that with zero conscious effort on your part, just self-sustaining. Pretty cool, right? In fact, and this is the part that really just blows my mind, right? Because our brains are way smarter than our minds are anyway. Stuff is going on in your body all the time. You don't even know about it. It just goes on. And what is our response, though, honestly, if you think about it, day to day, it's no. We want you to do something really spectacular, God, blow our minds. That would just, like manna from heaven, remember? Or, healing somebody. That would just prove it. To which, God may think, and it's not smart to try to put God's words in God's mouth, I don't think, but he might think, all right, well, thanks to that 300 gigahertz computer that you're all carrying around, you're almost able to heal most diseases on your own now anyway, right? I gave you the knowledge, the technology. I didn't just heal people. Like, I created a whole species of self-healers smart enough to do this. I mean, just imagine if people from like 2,000 years ago, the time that we've been reading about, what if those people showed up in our day today and just kind of looked at everything we have and sat around with us? I mean, they would think that our doctors are gods. They would literally start worshiping them because of what they could do. So anyway, okay, back to John. John wrote this gospel, and he has an agenda. And here's what he told us in John 20:34. He said, these things are written. He didn't write everything. He said, I couldn't write everything. It'd be too long. But I picked what I wrote so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life, greater life, by the power of his name. He's like, I don't want you just to believe this stuff was true. I don't want you just getting a history lesson. I want you to place your trust in the one I'm telling you about. And by placing your trust in him, by deciding to follow him, by modeling your life after him, you're going to have a different kind of life in his name. Whole different purpose, right? So he has an agenda, and he organizes his account around these events, and he calls them signs. And so today, we are at the fifth sign. And the way some people, if you go study this, some people would call this the sixth sign, depending on how you're counting it, right? But I think that's a movie, so we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it the fifth sign. And if you're reading along, your Bible may have this heading of what we're going to look at today. It's called the healing of the blind man. Some of you remember maybe growing up hearing this story, but let me catch you up to kind of where we're at in this series. Because we've been following Jesus. He's been traveling back and forth. He did this throughout his ministry, kind of up and down, north and south, from Judea to Galilee to Jerusalem, back up to Judea, Galilee. He just kept traveling. And in Judea toward Jerusalem, he's usually always in danger. Because that's where they're out to get him. That's where Jerusalem, or the temple leaders are. When he's in Galilee, things are a little bit nicer. But they're put out a little bit by Jesus when he comes to Jerusalem because he seems to contradict so much of what they're trying to teach and believe and get the people to do. He's stirring up the people, and if the people get stirred up, Rome's going to get stirred up. And if Rome gets stirred up, there's just a whole lot of trouble. So Jesus makes people nervous. But he'd go to Jerusalem, kind of stir things up. Then he'd go back up to Galilee. He'd take a breather. Then he'd teach a little bit, come back. So in this particular part of Jesus' journey, he's back in the vicinity of Jerusalem. John is with him, okay? And John tells us this in chapter 9. He says, as Jesus walked along, he saw a man who'd been blind from birth. And so then his disciples, and John was with them seeing all of this, he asked Jesus this real pointed question. Rabbi, they asked, why was this man born blind? That's maybe a question you thought of as well too, right? So then they asked him, though, was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? Because the assumption back in the first century was, okay, if you had something like this, there was a cause and effect relationship between sin and suffering. If somebody was suffering, it was obviously because they'd done something wrong. They were getting what they deserved. But, okay, the way they thought about it, like a pregnant woman could be doing nothing wrong, and then all of a sudden she sins while she's pregnant, and so her son or daughter, once they were born, they could suffer the consequences of their mother's sin. They just kind of believe this cause and effect. And I understand, we know that sometimes our behavior does cause suffering, right? Sometimes we suffer because other people make boneheaded decisions, and it affects us and things like that too. But when that's the case, okay, usually we can pinpoint that. It's usually pretty obvious. But when it's not so obvious, when it's just what we would call an act of God, when nature shows up, when something happens and we can't really pinpoint or put blame on something, it's not as obvious. There is no real connection. And so Jesus starts to shift their paradigm in what he says next. He tells them, it wasn't because of his sins or his parents' sins. And then he says something, okay, if you've read this before, this might sound really insensitive at first. But he says this. He said, this happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. And here's what Jesus is getting at here, because this does sound kind of like, wow, okay, that's not cool at all. But he's teaching us pain can have a purpose. You know, pain, perhaps even when you stop to think about it, perhaps pain and suffering always have some kind of purpose. Jesus' pain and suffering, it certainly did, right? This blind man's pain and suffering, we're going to see it did as well. And maybe, I don't know, the pain and suffering, the struggle that you're going through, wouldn't you like to believe that it has a purpose? It always makes it easier. Perhaps that's true in everything. But he tells them, okay, this man is not being punished. And his parents aren't being punished. But this particular pain and suffering happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. In other words, okay, and this might be a stretch for you, but sometimes Sometimes God chooses to display just how awesome He is through our pain and suffering. It has a purpose. And if you think about this, maybe you've seen this before, I bet. You've seen somebody, the way they responded to their struggle, to their pain, was just extraordinary in such a way that it made your faith get stronger. Like it was inspiring. I've seen that as a pastor. I've seen all kinds of things, as you can imagine. The most extraordinary things to me, as I think back, I wasn't necessarily blown away by the stories of people who, lived wrinkle-free lives. Their kids got all the scholarships, right? They lived to be 99 and die in their sleep, right? That's not all that impressive. That's cool, but what's really impressive, what's really inspiring to me is when I see a man, a woman, a child, right, that goes through extraordinarily difficult times, and yet their faith is rock solid, right? That keeps me going. That tells me I can do that. I want to do that. I want to be that person, right? So Jesus turns to his audience there and he says this, okay? They're focused on this blind man. They're kind of whispering about him maybe. Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, hey guys, we must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming and then no one can work. To which they thought probably what you're thinking right now. What? What does that have to do with anything about this blind man? So Jesus, that's what you do, right? We're talking about one thing, and you're always going off on these other areas and talking about something else. And we're wondering why this man is blind, and now, what? But he goes on, and he says, okay, this is why this is important. While I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. And here's his point, and this is why this is really powerful, okay? It's really the whole point of John's gospel. He says, look, guys, my identity, who I really am, who you're looking at right now, will never be more apparent than it is right now. While I'm here, you see it. The light of the world, me, I will never be brighter than I am right now, right here when I'm with you. And when I leave, it's going to be darker. So while I'm here, he's saying you better watch, pay attention, right? He's setting this thing up, but you guys need to be paying attention to what's really going on. Take good notes, right? You, John, and Matthew, make sure you're writing this stuff down. I don't know if he told them that or not, but they did. So fortunately, we get to read it. So after saying this, they're still like, all right, but okay, back to the question: why was this man more blind, Jesus? But then immediately Jesus does another one of his real strange Jesus things. Look at this. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and before they could even jump in and say, hey, you remember we're at the temple. You don't spit on the temple ground, Jesus, right? It says no. He spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Now, if you've heard this story before, step back a little bit and kind of enter this as if you've never heard this before, because that's just weird, isn't it? And this was one of these stories. I wish we had more details, but we don't. Like, did he even ask this guy first or even set him up for what's about to happen? God, put yourself in the blind man's shoes. What in the world, right? And they say, Peter and John, right, okay, hold him down, we'll do this or something. Probably not, but it's just odd, and we don't have any more details why Jesus chose to do it this way. So Jesus makes a little mud with his spit, and then he rubs it in this guy's eyes, and then he says something to him that we've heard him tell other people. He tells this blind man, he says, go and wash yourself in the pool of Siloam this time. So the blind man, okay, watch this. This is foreshadowing. This is John's whole point. This is why I believe John chose this as one of the events that he included in his gospel to write about. The blind man, what does he do? He doesn't question anything. He walks by faith, not by what? Sight. Literally, right? He's a blind man. He gets up and does exactly what Jesus calls him to do. Walks by faith, not by sight. You know what he did? Okay, he did what your heavenly Father would like for you to do. He chose to trust someone that he couldn't see based on what he heard about that person. It's exactly what we see this guy doing here. And at the end of John's gospel, we're going to talk about this when we get there, but you might remember, he said, hey, Jesus told his disciples, you guys are blessed because you actually get to see these things. You saw all this stuff, but I'm telling you, double blessed are those who don't see it and still believe. And that was us he was talking about. That's pretty cool. So, okay, verse 8, the man went, washed, and came back seeing. And then he went home, and it says his neighbors and the others who knew him as a blind beggar start asking each other, right? Wait, isn't that the guy that used to sit and beg? Some of them said he was, others said, no, it just looks like him, right? But the beggar was like, hey, no, it's me, right? He kept telling them, yes, it's really me, it's me. And of course they would ask the question. Anybody would ask this, right? They asked, okay, well, who did this? Who healed you? How did this happen? And he replied, the man they called Jesus made mud, and spread it over my eyes. And maybe he didn't know how Jesus made the mud. It doesn't tell us, and maybe it's better that he didn't know how Jesus made the mud. I don't know. He just knows. And so he told me, go to the pool of Siloam, wash yourself. So I went and washed. I just did what he asked me to do. Wow. Even though it made absolutely no sense. Like there it is again. I did what he asked me to do, and I washed. And now I can see. And of course, they're curious, all right? Okay, well, where is he now? Where is this guy? I don't know, he replied, which is kind of like a duh question, right? It's like, I didn't see which way he went. Doesn't take a Sherlock, right? Now, I shouldn't put words in the mouth of someone Jesus just healed. But it's funny to me. He just said, I don't know. So they did what they were supposed to do based on the old covenant between God and the nation of Israel. When someone was miraculously healed, or it seemed like someone was going to be able to come back into society after being healed, the law said you got to take them to the leaders, the religious leaders. So that's what they did. They took him to the man. They took the man to the Pharisees. And this is where the soundtrack and the music starts to change a little bit again for us, right? Because Jesus has done it again. It was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. It's like, Jesus, will you ever learn, right? It always happening. Now, there wasn't any actual law against spitting or even making mud. Not exactly, but there was something almost as crazy. Like according to the tradition of the elders. And the tradition of the elders wasn't necessarily the law. It's what they kind of piled on top of the law. But one of the things they said at this time was that you couldn't mix on the Sabbath. Like that was work. You couldn't knead, like K-N-E-A-D, knead bread. You couldn't mix anything. That was considered work on the Sabbaths. And so Jesus, by mixing spit and dirt and making mud, mixed. He broke the Sabbath. And you weren't supposed to heal or practice medicine on the Sabbath either, unless it was to save a life. So Jesus is in big trouble with the leaders again. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put mud on my eyes, and when I washed it away, which meant he probably broke the Sabbath too, literally. He said, I could see. So some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God. Well, how do you know that? Because he's working on the Sabbath. Well, technically, okay, he didn't keep their version of the Sabbath. He really didn't break any of God's laws by doing this. But what happened was, and let's not be too judgmental, what was really going on, Jesus did not fit into their God box. You heard of this before? And whether you recognize it or not, most of us, in fact, all of us, I would argue, have a God box. We have an idea about God. Even if you don't believe in God, you have a God box. That's your God box. And Jesus is operating outside the boundaries of their God box right now. Doesn't fit. He can't possibly be from God then. But others ask a really important question. They're like, wait. But how could an ordinary sinner do these miraculous signs? They're pointing to something. John says these are all pointing to the identity of Jesus. So if he's really a sinner, how in the world could he be doing this kind of stuff? So it says there was a deep division. The Pharisees again questioned the man who'd been born blind, and they demanded, okay, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? I think they're just kind of fishing for something here. Okay, do you think he's a sinner or is he not a sinner? The man replies, okay, I think he must be a prophet. You know, at the very least, there's something different about this guy. Well, the Jewish leaders still refuse to believe the man had been born blind and now he could see, so they call in his parents. They're just not going to believe him. They just think he's making the whole thing up. So they bring the man's parents in. The man's parents are afraid, obviously, because anytime you get called in to see the religious leaders on the Sabbath, probably means you're in trouble. You did something wrong. So they ask him, is this your son? And if so, was he born blind? And how can he see now? So his parents reply, okay, we know he's our son, right? We know he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. And now they're getting out of the way. You can ask him. He's old enough to answer for himself. And then check this out, okay? His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced, okay, and here's where some of you are. I want you to pay attention. This is where some of you or someone you know maybe is. They already announced. In other words, they had already decided. They already had God in their box. They'd already made up their minds, okay? There wasn't room in their worldview for what Jesus was doing right now. For what was happening right before their eyes. They just weren't going to believe it. They'd already decided, they'd already announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. Doesn't matter what happens. That's the rule. That's where we're going. which meant, okay, when you're kicked out of the synagogue, you're basically ostracized from society back then, blacklisted. The religious leaders, okay, think about it. This is where I want you to personalize this. Like some of us, let's be honest, they were the ones that were blind. Why? Because they were blind because of their presumptions, their predispositions, their opinions. They were blinded by their faulty beliefs. They just were unwilling to see anything differently. You know, Francis Collins, I quoted from him a few weeks back. He referred to this, if you remember, he called this willful blindness. I just refuse to open my mind to anything new. You know, when there's something to be seen, but you won't look, right? When there's something to discover, but you won't take time to discover it. I don't want to change. When the cognitive bias, that it only allows you to receive information and talk to people and like people that think like you and believe like you, and you refuse to acknowledge anything that might pull you out of your context, you know, that might cause you to think. And if you're a Christian or a non-Christian, right, anything that pulls you outside of your God box, that's where they're at. That's maybe where you are. So they're still not done with this guy. So the second time they call the man who's been born blind and told him, God should get glory for this. Because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. And I love the honesty of this guy's response, okay? I love it. I don't know. I don't know whether he's a sinner. You guys can decide that beside yourselves. I know this. I was born blind. Now I can see. Can't argue with that. Can't argue with my experience. That's all I know. Well, here's what he's saying. I don't have to understand everything to believe something. I don't have to be able to explain everything to believe what's right before my eyes. Right? I don't have to be able to explain how everything works. I don't have to explain how my heart keeps bumping and pumping without me telling it to. I just know it does, and I'm thankful. Right? I don't know how it all worked out and why, but I know it did. Something happened. I don't have to understand everything to believe something. And here's the good news, okay? You don't either. And maybe this is where you've been hung up, and I understand this. Maybe this is where somebody that you know has been hung up, right? I just can't get over this. I just can't believe this. So I got to throw it all out. You want to understand everything before you believe anything, and I get it. I'm kind of wired that way. I'm skeptical. But here's the thing that I think you and I have in common. Like, isn't it true when you think about the rest of your life? Isn't it true that you don't hold that standard to pretty much any other area in your life? Like, think about it. I mean, do you believe in something like love? How many of you believe in love? Sing songs about it, right? Now, if I ask you to define love, what is it? It's a little difficult when you start to think about it. Like, tell me what love is. Is it a feeling? Is it emotion? Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Right? Can you explain it? Do you believe in energy? We exerted some a little bit earlier. You believe in it? You need it? Hope so. Can you explain it? I mean, I can't. But I know it's there. How about this? Do you believe in information? Sure. Do you use information? Yeah. Can you explain it? Not really. It's just information, right? Same with energy, same with consciousness, same with love. You know, here's the great news, because I know some of you or someone you know would love to come back to faith. Maybe there's someone that you know that's just kind of wrestling with this. They still haven't found what they're looking for, right? But they just can't cross that line. They can't come back. The brain won't let them. Some of you, I know this for a fact, some of you miss the music of church. Some of you miss the energy of being around people excited about their life. Some of you miss the community. But something happened. You got bumped out, and you stand outside looking in, and you think, okay, I missed some of that. I need some of that, but I got to understand everything. I got too many questions right now. I got to understand everything before I believe anything. And you don't hold yourself to that standard in every other area of your life. And honestly, your Heavenly Father, who's way bigger than your God box anyway, says, okay, why don't we just take a baby step? Why don't you just step and lean into something that you do understand, that you can believe, and perhaps along the way as you take that step, you might learn to understand something else better. And the incredible thing is that for many of you, this is your story, right? This is the story of millions of Jesus followers. I can't understand it. I don't understand it at all. All I know is there was a season in my life where things were really, really bad. I was at the end of myself. There was a season in my life where I hit a wall. There was a season in my life, I was controlled by an addiction. A season in my life that I was really, really lonely. Maybe I was suicidal. There was a season in my life where I just came to the end of it all, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I cried out to God. I didn't even know if He was there. I just asked God. I got on my knees, and I just can't explain it. I can't even show you a verse for this. But all I can tell you is something happened. Something renewed my hope. Something got me up. And for some of you, it happened right then. Maybe for some of you, it was more of a process. But something happened, right? You're just like this guy. I don't know how it happened. I was blind, but now I can see. That's all I know. right? And when people hear your story, yeah, I acknowledge there's some gaps. There's some big questions. There's some things I still don't understand. There's some things I don't even want to talk about because I don't get it. And I don't have all the answers. I'm just telling you, though, I would never go back to where I was for anything. And only by the grace of a loving God who's invited me to call him my Father am I even here today, right? That's my story. That was his story. All I know is I was blind. Now I can see. But they're still not done with this guy, okay? They ask him, but what did he do? How did he heal you? And by this time, okay, this guy's done. He's finished as well. He's like, look, exclamation point. I told you once already, right? Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? And then I love this, okay? It's like he gets right up in their grill, like he's just going to just poke them. Do you want to become his disciples too? Now imagine you're one of the Pharisees. They come unhitched. They cursed him, it says, and they said, you're his disciple. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this guy came from. And now this guy, okay, I think he's getting a little bit more confident because he's got under the skin. I think he's showing a little chutzpah. He's like, well, that's pretty strange, he tells them. He healed my eyes, and you don't even know where he comes from. I think he's just kind of like, isn't it obvious where he comes from? Are you guys that ignorant, right? Isn't it right before your eyes? How much evidence do you need to know that this man came from God? Only God could do these things. In fact, it's what he says. Ever since the world began, no one's ever been able to open the eyes of a blind man. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. Pretty good argument. He's calling them dumb, basically, right? And so they're going to have to change their robes if he keeps on going. They get up. You were born a sinner, they said. Are you trying to teach us? Who do you think you are? Do you forget who you're talking to? All this kind of stuff. And they threw him out of the synagogue. Like they're done. No more argument. They're just done. They had no answer because of their own willful blindness. Their own refusal to look. They're refusing to see what could be seen. Refusing to discover what could be discovered. And let's just be honest. That doesn't look good on anybody. That's just pure ignorance. And okay, Christian folk, we are not immune to this either. I mean, come on. Historically, like some of our resistance to just things like science and resistance to people who aren't like us, our resistance to people who don't fit in the box that we've always been taught is acceptable to God, right? We're unwilling to look at things as if the truth won't stand up to God. Can't our unwillingness to look beyond our God box make us look a lot like these religious leaders in the story sometimes if we're not careful? And what happens on the other side of that journey for many of us, all right, listen, this is where it gets personal for me. Instead of expressing compassion, instead of leading with love like Jesus taught us to do, we have expressed disdain. We have expressed, even hatred for different generations. There have been different groups of people that have met this when they've come to our churches where we sing about God's mercy and grace. But because we couldn't figure out how certain people, certain beliefs fit into our God box, we grew up with, we end up alienating many people that God loves. And worse than that, okay, if you continue to keep God in your little box, you will ultimately miss a real relationship with God yourself. I just believe we should be some of the most curious, the most accepting, the most loving for sure, the most compassionate. I mean, dare I even say the most open-minded, because all truth is God's truth. Why are we afraid of that? We should be the most of that of any people we find ourselves. We should not be afraid to gaze past our own knowledge, right? Our fear of ignorance, because we all got things to learn. We should be some of the most excited people when it comes to creating environments, creating opportunities for people who are far from God to move towards God. And any step towards God from anybody, from anywhere, whether it fits into our God box or not, that should excite us to no end. Even if they don't get the words right? Even if they don't get the theology right. If we don't move beyond our idea of God in the box, like these men in this story, we run the risk of missing God. Now, if you're not a Christian, okay, or maybe you used to be, or somebody's, I don't know, you're at home and somebody's making you watch this, okay, they bribed you with lunch or whatever, you're just accidentally watching it. I want to ask you the same question, though, okay, are you afraid to look? Like, are you curious? Have you looked at all lately? Have there been any of those what-if questions? Have you closed the door on all religion? Have you closed the door on the idea of God? Maybe you closed the door on the fact that Jesus might, in fact, be who Jesus claimed to be. I mean, is that not even worth thinking about for you anymore? Have you closed the door on the concept that a physical, literal resurrection 2,000 years ago happened? And is it possible, just asking, is it possible that maybe you have God in a box too? And anything that doesn't immediately fit, you just throw it out. You just discount it. I'm not even going to listen to that. That's just ignorant. That's just hard. I don't even want to think about it. Perhaps that's why you walked away from faith long ago or maybe even recently. In fact, it's even stranger than that. You know, maybe the God that you quit believing in is the same exact God that some of us Christians try to keep in our box too. And you had the courage to look beyond. You had the courage to actually ask some questions, and you didn't get really good answers, and that's why you walked away from faith. And a lot of Christians are afraid to look outside the box because they're afraid they might lose faith too. And the truth is, listen, all of us need to understand, God is so much bigger than our little boxes. God, the truth is not a threat to God. Learning new things is not a threat to God. Changing our thinking is not a threat to God. Perhaps God is bigger than you were taught He was, because I think we would all agree with this, okay? It's okay to learn something new. It's okay to admit that you're wrong sometimes. It's okay to be wrong about something, because we're all wrong about a lot of things. I mean, remember 10 years ago, we all look back and there's some things we wish back and, how in the world did I wear that? What was I thinking, I mean, you look at that and you look at what you thought, and both of them are embarrassing. It's okay to change some things because we're all learning. We're all curious. We're all figuring things out. But can we all agree on this, okay? It's not okay to not look if there's something to be seen. It's not okay to be willfully ignorant, to be willfully blind. And John's entire message throughout his gospel is simply this, okay? There is something you should see. And I want you to see it the way I saw it as best I can. There is something, if you had seen what I saw, he's saying, I mean, you would be convinced, without a doubt, that Jesus was the Messiah, just like I was. That Jesus is the Son of God. And that by believing in that, it'll change your life. You'll have life through His name. I mean, the biggest discovery of all, I think he would tell us, is that our Heavenly Father, God, so loved the world so much. This is what John told us, right? That He loved the world so much He gave Himself. Why? So no one would ever have to be lost to God. And that took us all by surprise, he said. And when He died, we assumed it was over. We thought we'd been fooled. We'd been tricked. But then He rose from the dead, and that's when we realized He was exactly who He claimed to be. And this whole thing was much bigger than we thought it was. The good news is this, okay? You don't have to understand everything to believe something. You don't have to have all your answers neatly tied up and bowed in order to take the step that you feel like you want to take and need to take in faith. So you should consider this invitation of John. And just look. Just be willing to look. Just be willing to ask that question. Just be willing to be open to the answer. And perhaps one day believe. Or maybe for some of you, believe again. And I don't know where this hits you. There's a broad spectrum. I know of people here and listening online and maybe listening later. But I want to encourage you to take that step, okay? Don't just sit there and be mad at me or agree with me or not. But John wrote this so we would do something. What is your next step? Maybe it's just simply to come back, to listen again next week, to continue investigating, to continue on this journey. But maybe today is the day that you actually feel like I need to do something tangible. I need to say something I've never said before. Jesus, I do believe. Maybe that's your next step. And if that's so, we'd love to celebrate that with you. You can go online. You can use the app to let us know. You can ask for prayer. Maybe you just have other questions. Maybe you just need to talk to somebody. We'd love to do that. But wherever this thing hits you, this isn't the kind of message John gave us so that we would just go home and feel like we heard something good. Do something with it. Or just pray. Let me pray with you. Father, I thank you for the freedom that's found in knowing that that you can stand against anything, God. And I just pray that you would allow us to really see you with the same eyes that John saw you. God, to not only just understand these things historically, not just to be able to pass the Bible quiz, but God, to be able to do something with it. And help us to know what that is. What is our next step? What should we do with what we've just heard? God, whether that's changing our thinking. Maybe it's just to broaden our thinking. Maybe it's just to go out and love someone that up to this point we've had a hard time loving. God, maybe our next step is to actually say, I trust you. Maybe we've never said that before. But God, whatever that is, I just pray that in your own way, you'd speak to us in a way that we know that it's you. that you would speak beyond my words, that you would encourage us, that you would strengthen us. As we put our trust and faith in you, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so come back next week.